In this problem, we're going to compute 636 divided by 8 using partial quotients. First, I want to start by setting up my division problem. 8 is the divisor out front with 636 underneath. And so the next thing I want to do over to the right is say, okay, 8 times 10, we're using multiples of 10, is going to give me 80, whereas 8 times 100 will give us 800. Now 800 is too big because our number is only 636. So then you want to draw your line down to the right of your division problem. And so I'll start with saying 8 times 10 is 80, so I will subtract 80 from the 636. I am going to have to regroup here. First, 6 minus 0 is that, and then regroup that to be 13. This is a 5. 13 minus 8 is 5, and then 5 minus 0 is 5. So I have already divided by 10. Okay, so now I'm going to repeat this. So 8 times 10 again is 80. So I'm going to subtract 80 off. Because remember, repeated addition is multiplication, and repeated subtraction, which is what we're doing here, is in fact division. So we're repeating subtracting of this 80 because 8 times 10 is the 80. And so again, I'm going to have to regroup, give that a 15, this becomes 4, and so we have 476, and that's when I divided by 10 again. And again, I'm going to repeat subtracting 80, and so we have 6 here, regrouping that. We have 17 minus 8, and that is 9. 3 minus 0 is 3. Now you can see that this is going to be a really long problem because of repeating subtracting by 80. So one of the things you can do, and you can change it up if you notice this, in the middle of the problem, you can change it up and it won't affect anything. If I subtracted by 160 instead, because 8 times 20 is 160, that might make this go a little bit faster. So let's try that. So let's subtract 160. 6 minus 0 is 6, 9 minus 6 is 3, 3 minus 1 is 2. Now that time I divided by 20. All right, so keep that in mind when you're keeping track of these things that you've divided by on the right or subtracted by on the right. You need to write the right number. All right, so now should I subtract 160 again? Sure, I mean, we're getting closer here. So I'm going to subtract that, 6, and regroup. And 13 minus 6 is 7. All right, so now I'm down to 76. When I'm down to, first let me write that 20 in there. Now, when I'm down to double digits, 76 is just 2 digits, and I'm dividing by a single digits, I should know those multiplication tables so that 8 times something will give me close to or exactly 76. And so 8 times 9 is 72. And that's close to 76. It doesn't go over, it doesn't match up exactly, but it is going to work nevertheless. And so 72 is what I'm going to subtract here because I'm now dividing by 9. Excuse me. And so subtracting those two, 76 minus 72, I have 4. And that's because this problem does have a remainder of 4. Okay, so now let's count these up. Okay, so we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 9. So 79. So that, by doing these partial products, I was able to figure out the answer of the division 636 divided by 8 is 79, remainder 4, all by subtracting only partial of the answer each time. Repeated subtraction. In letter B, we're going to divide 376 divided by 12 using partial quotients. So we'll start by setting up our division problem. 12 out front, 376 underneath. Over on the right, I'm going to take 12 and multiply that by 10 to get 120. And then I'll take my 12 and multiply that by 100, to give us 1200. 1200 being too big, so we're not going to use that. It's only 376 down there. So let's line everything up. I'm going to take that 120 over here and I'm going to subtract it from my 376. So 6, 5, and 2. Now remember, I divided by 10 when I subtracted by that 120. And so 256, I'm going to again subtract that 120. All right, and so I have 6 and 3 and 1. So again, another 10. And then 120 again, subtract. And subtract that. 6, 3 minus 2 gives me 1. And that was a 10. And so now I'm at 16. Okay, and so one of the multiples of 10 is actually 1, right? So 12 times 10 is 12. And so that's going to be dividing by 1. And so 12 times 1 is 12. And we subtract that and we get 4. And so here I divided by 1. I divided and got 1. So what do we have here? We have 3 tens and a 1, and so that's 31. And so our quotient is 31, remainder, this 4 down here. In this problem, we have 4,756 divided by 8, and so I'm going to set up the division problem. Now, in letter A, we also divided by 8, so maybe we've learned something from that, in that when we work over here, 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 10 is 80. 8 times 100 is 800. 800 might work. 8 times 1,000 is going to be 8,000. 8,000 is too big. We only have the number 4,756. So why don't we start with 800, subtracting 800. So we want to subtract 800 in our partial quotient. We have 6, 5, and we need to regroup here. 17 minus 8 is 9. Oops, I meant to make that black. And then the 3 here. And so this still may take a long time, subtracting 800 each of these times. So let's do multiples of 100. So let's try 8 times 200. That gives us 1,600. 8 times 300, that gives us 2,400. 8 times 400 gives us 3,200. And 8 times 500 gives us 4,000, which at this point, since I only have 3,956, that's too big. I could have used that earlier, but I'm not going to now. Now, one thing I did forget to do is put 100 over here, since we already divided by 100 by subtracting that 800. So now I'm going to use 400 instead. So 8 times 400 is 3,200. So I'm going to subtract 3,200 here. That way it does shorten my repeated subtractions. Okay, and my partial quotients. 6 minus 0 is 6, 5 minus 0 is 5, 9 minus 2 is 7. All right, so here we divided by 400. Now, since I've already done these multiplications to the right, I know that 3,200 is not going to work anymore. 2,400 is not going to work anymore. 1,600 is not going to work anymore because I only have 756. Now 756 is close to 800, but 800 is still too big. So now I'm going to have to start working with the 80s. Okay, so I'm going to start subtracting 80s from this. And maybe that's going to take too long, but let's at least do one of them. Okay, or I'm sorry, that's a 10 there. Okay, and so 80. And so I'm going to subtract, and I end up having to regroup. And, oops, I meant to make those black. 676. Okay, so that's still big, and it's going to take me a while. So let's do multiples of 10. 8 times 20 is 160. 8 times 30 is 240. 8 times 40 is 320. 8 times 50 equals 400. 8 times 60 equals 480. 8 times 70 equals 560. 8 times 80 equals 640. Oh, I'm 80, sorry. 8 times 90 equals 720. 720 being too big, so we're not going to use that. Let's use that 8 times 80. And so 640 is now what I'm going to subtract from, just like that. And so when I subtract, I get 6. 7 minus 4 is 3. And what did I divide by here? 80. Okay. And so now I have 36. All right, so we're back to eliminating some of this, but now I'm down to the double digits, right? And so we talked about when we got to the double digits and we're dividing by a single digit, 36 divided by 8 does not go evenly, but we know that 8 times 4 gives us 32. And that's close without going over from that 36. So I'm going to put a 32 here, and I'm going to subtract that to be a remainder of 4. And so what did I divide by there? It was a 4. And so what do we have here? We have to count up these numbers here. All right, so we have 400, 100, 10, 80, and 4. So adding those up, we get 594. And so our answer to 4,756 divided by 8 is 594. And then don't forget we have this remainder 4 at the end. And lastly, we have 2,408 divided by 42. And so we'll start with 42 times 1 over here gives us 42. 42 times 10 gives us 420. 42 times 100 gives us 4,200, and that will be too big. We may end up using multiples of 10 at that point, but let's see. So we have, let's set it up, 42 into 2408. So yeah, let's start with multiples of 10 now. Let's do 42 times 20. That gives us 840. 42 times 30. That gives us 1,260. Now, after that, 42 times 40, those might be too hard of multiplications to do in your head. We want to do some of this in our head, but if not, 42 is not a single digit like it was with those 8s, and so that might have been a little bit easier for you as well. If it starts getting too complicated, just stick with things you know, like 42 times 20 being 840. So let's start with that. Even though we'll have to do multiple rounds, that's okay. There's no wrong way to do this. And so I'm going to subtract 840 here. And so 8 minus 0 is 8. Regrouping here. I have 10 minus 4 is 6. 3 minus 8, I'm going to have to regroup that to be 13 and this to be 1. 13 minus 8 is 5, and 1 minus 0 is 1. And so there, I divided by 20. So I'm going to do that again. We're going to do 840. subtracting 840 from 1568, I have 8, and do some regrouping here. 16, oh, I'm sorry, 6, actually 6 minus 4, I can do that. All right, so that's 2, and then 5, yeah, 5 minus 8, or 15, you can call this 15 minus 8 at this point, is 7. Sorry for the messiness there. Let's clean that up a bit. Okay, so what do we have? We had a 6 here, and then we had a 5 here. There we go. Oops, and that is not a minus sign, that is just an arrow that I wrote. Okay, so there we go. So now we have 720. Okay, we divided by 20 there. We have 728, and that's too small compared to that 840. So we need to move down to dividing by 10. And so we have our 420 here to subtract by. We have 8, 0, and 3. And don't forget to put your 10 over on the side. We cannot subtract 420 anymore, so we're going to have to start subtracting 42s. Now, subtracting 42s, that's a lot, or that's not a lot, so it might take a while to get there. We may want to say, okay, multiples of 42. So 42 times 2 gives us that 84. 42 times 3 gives us 126. 42 times 4, that'll give us 168. 42 times 5, that'll give us 210. All right, so that one took me a minute to get, more so than the rest. So I'm going to use this one because that one was a little easier to do in my head there. So you want to make sure that you're not going too much. You want to make this process as easy as possible. So I'm going to be subtracting 168 from that. And so we end up with 0 here. 3 becomes a 2. This becomes a 10. And so we have 4 and 1. And so don't forget to put your number over here. I used the 4. Now I can't use that anymore because 168 is too much. I might use the next one down, 126. So I'm going to subtract 120. I meant to make that black. 126 and subtract that. Subtracting that, I have 3 there now and a 10 there. So we have 4 and 14. All right, so 14 is now lower than our divisor, the 42, and so that will be our remainder. Now don't forget, I almost did to put my 3 down there. So now I'm going to total these guys up here. So we have 20, 40, 50, 4, 57. 57 is my total. That will be my quotient with a remainder of 14. Remember, the remainder has to be smaller than the divisor.